swag vibe, baby.
Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe, and I'm really excited about my guest today, Chris E. Chris has been sober since June 2nd, 2016. He was born in Birmingham, England in 1963. Chris holds a degree in chemical engineering and a postgrad certificate in education. He moved to the U.S. in the mid-1990s and became a proud U.S. citizen in 2012. Chris is a computer programmer known among friends as a talented cook, an avid hiker, and a seasoned camper, both front and back country. And yes, he's even a graduate of the bartending school of Knoxville. I'm sure he'll mention that today. Chris met his late wife, who was a pretty amazing lady, Janet, through community theater in Sheffield, England. They continue to share their love of acting in Dallas and Chicago. Though he's not currently a pet owner, he's a go-to dog sitter among his friends. So grab a cup of coffee, relax, and let's get into it. Chris, how you doing today?
Yeah, pretty good. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm so glad you're here. So tell me, what was it like growing up, Chris?
Well, you can probably tell from my accent, Joe, if you didn't know me already, that I'm not from around here. So, I grew up in one of those foreign parts. It was a little different over there than it is over here. There's no law against giving alcohol to minors in the UK. Families regularly share a glass of wine over dinner with their children that are well under the age of 18. So, I started having a tipple at quite an early age. So, I got the taste for it early. And, my family were of the opinion that if you introduced your children to alcohol at an early age, then they would become sensible, responsible drinkers. And I think I probably give the lie to that, because that's not what happened for me. My parents were very good people. They were very caring, provided me with everything I needed. There was no abuse in my childhood, no trauma really of any kind, though we didn't talk about things much, everything, especially emotional things. I don't recall anybody ever sitting down and having a conversation about, what should you do when you get angry, or how do you deal with these situations in life, or anything like that. We kind of had to figure things out on our own. And there wasn't a great deal of talking about things, but I don't know. I think that's definitely the rule in most families in the UK. I think there's not a lot of emotional intelligence. I don't know about growing up over here, but that's one of the things I really appreciate about being in the recovery community now, is we talk about those things, and you have an opportunity to hear what other people's experiences are with emotional difficulties or fears or loss and all that kind of stuff, and it makes you know that you're normal. And I didn't really feel that growing up. I thought, I'm going through these things. They're not the kinds of things that other people are going through. I had a thing happen to me when I was very young, which was my mother was vacuum cleaning in one of the rooms, and there was a spider which I rescued from the vacuum cleaner and put outside, and it ran into a corner and it stopped moving and never moved out of that corner. That the shock or whatever had passed away, or maybe it was ready to die or something, I don't know. But that was like my first time I realized that things were going to die, and I started thinking about what's going to happen when my parents die, what's going to happen to me, and that kind of stuff, and went into a little bit of a depression, and didn't really have anybody to talk to about it. So, little things like that they say, that alcoholics live in the wreckage of the past. I started living in the wreckage of the future at an early age, and wondering, like imagining bad things that might happen and then torturing myself with those, which, I try to avoid doing nowadays now I'm kind of into recovery. So, but when I was 16, my father got a new job. He was a metallurgist, and he worked for a company called Imperial Metal Industries in Birmingham, and he had an opportunity to move and go to South Wales for a promotion. And I was still in school, but they were like, "You're going to come with us," and I wasn't that keen on the idea of uprooting myself and leaving my school friends and going to a strange place that I didn't know. But I guess there wasn't really any other choice but to do that and start fresh in a new place, which I guess I was afraid of the change. I didn't really want to go through that change. But it turned out okay. When I got down to South Wales, I was in a new school. I made new friends. I joined the Venture Scouts. And we started going down to the pub for beer, which, our scoutmaster was quite happy to go up to the bar for us and buy us a pint, a couple of years before we were actually old enough to legally drink. They were much more lenient on that kind of stuff. So, I was able to get into the beer at that point at an early age and start getting a taste for it, And then when I was
Did you say Venture, Chris?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Venture Scouts. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a.
Would that be similar to our Boy Scouts?
Yeah, but they have the Cubs and the Scouts. Well, we have like an older thing, like the girls when they're older, between 16 and 21, they have the Rangers, and then we had the Venture Scouts, which were the Scouts between the ages of 16 and 21. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had never heard that before, so I was just curious. Sorry, Chris.
No, that's okay. Yeah, and so when I was 17, I think it was the first time I'd had I really noticed myself drinking alcoholically. It was my sister was 4 years older than me. She was still living in Birmingham. She stayed there when we moved down to South Wales, and she came to visit for her 21st birthday, and we had wine with dinner. And then afterwards, I went out to a party with school friends, and they had hard cider. And, I started drinking that and did not stop till I started throwing up. And then when one of my school friends was comforting me as I threw up in the kitchen sink, he was saying to me, "Oh, I suppose you've learned your lesson. You won't drink too much in the future, or you won't drink at all." I'd be like, "Oh no, I'm going to drink in the future. This is great." In the middle of throwing up, I knew I wasn't going to stop. And that kind of indicates to me maybe that I was an alcoholic from the get-go, besides the thinking and the thinking about the disasters and stuff like that. I had that allergy when I started drinking that time. I just didn't want to stop, and I kept going and going until I physically couldn't get any more in me, and it started coming back out again. So that was my time up to my college age, when I went off to college.
Where did you go to college, Chris?
I went to the University of Bath, which was considered to be a good place to go if you lived in South Wales. It was, 2 or 3 hours drive away, far enough so that you would be away from your parents, and have that little bit of independence, so you could do your own thing, but close enough so they could come and fetch you back in the holidays, and bring you back home for Christmas and during the summer and that kind of stuff. I didn't have a car. I didn't learn to drive until after I graduated college. So, I relied on my parents to kind of bring me to and from college, and walked around everywhere. Or there was a hitchhiking line at the bottom of the hill in Bath where people would line up at the bottom, and people with cars would pick them up and run them up the hill to the university. And Bath is a lovely town. It's got very strict planning laws. Everything has to be built in the local stone. And so the university, which is like a modern concrete and steel monstrosity, that had to be built at the top of the hill, out of the town. So, anybody who lived down the hill had to get up the hill in order to go to their classes. And mostly people would hitchhike up there. So, and of course, drinking was a big thing for me in college. The student union bar had the cheapest beer, and, we would regularly be in the student union bar drinking with our friends and hanging out. And I also had the advantage. My father started making his own homemade wine when I was 11 or 12, when he gave up smoking. And I also picked up that skill and made. The dorm rooms were very warm. They were well heated, so you could make a gallon of wine in quite a good short order of time because it was so warm in there. And we didn't leave it very long to mature before we, got it out of the bottles and down our necks. So I gave a terrible hangover to quite a few of my friends in my freshman year at college.
I can only imagine you were pretty popular, though, I'm sure, with your skills.
Well, yeah, well, I guess so. I mean, there were no shortage of takers for the homemade wine, that's for sure, even though it was disgusting.
So did you notice at that time that you might have, were there consequences, or was there anything that, did you have any idea that you might be having a drinking problem at that time?
My main concern at that time was that I would be able to drink without throwing up. And, that is something that I actually managed to achieve. They say in AA, that we can't control and enjoy our drinking. And I mean, I've spent a good amount of time trying to control my drinking. I was like, I know if I only drink 100 ounces of beer, which is 5 British pints, then I'm probably not going to get sick. But then I'd do something like I'd make a batch of homemade beer and put extra sugar in to make it stronger than it should be. And then I'd get sick again, and it would just edge up my alcohol tolerance a little bit at a time until basically I could drink steadily all the way through the evening and late into the evening, without making myself ill. So I suppose the only consequences then were, of course, the usual stuff that college students do, not getting your assignments in till the last minute and then having to pull an all-nighter, because you have an assignment that you got to get in the next day and you haven't done it because you've been out busy drinking, or, you were drinking the previous night when you should have been doing it. And then, it comes to the night before it's due and you're like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to go out and drink tonight because now I've got to stay up all night and, get my assignments done. So I did that quite a bit when I was younger. At one time when I was doing my graduate certificate in education, I had a whole load of assignments that were due, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to get this done unless, I take some drastic action. So I actually sat down and wrote a contract with myself that I would get up at a certain time every day, that I wouldn't drink for that whole week, and I would not watch TV or distract myself in any way. I'd just get these assignments done. And, I stuck to that contract that I made with myself. I got all my assignments in, and successfully submitted. And then that was it, oh, great. And that's done. I can start drinking again now. So, I guess I knew that drinking was one of the things that was kind of holding me back. But at that time, I was able to at least, if I didn't take the first drink, I was able to not drink. I was able to stop for a short amount of time at that time and kind of get through so I could take care of business, in everyday life and do the things that I wanted to do, and that wasn't necessarily the same, towards the end that I would have been able to do that, I guess the other thing. No, go ahead.
No. You go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
I would say the other consequences that I had, they do say that alcoholics, when they start drinking, it stunts your emotional development. And, I know that I didn't have the emotional maturity. My relationships with the opposite sex were never very good. I never learned the proper things to do, when I was drinking, I was always thinking, oh, I don't know why my romantic life is not very successful. I was full of self-pity, complaining to my friends about it. But, the truth is that drinking was more important to me than that, and the self-pity, was an indulgence that I had, to give myself an excuse to sit and drink. But, I had quite a lot of emotional and romantic drama when I was younger. And a lot of that made it onto my resentment list when I finally got sober at the age of 53, that I was still thinking about those things and feeling self-pity about them and complaining about them in my own mind, that things hadn't worked out the way that I thought they should have done, in my romantic life. It's like, so I guess I would probably consider that to be a consequence, And the other consequence I had was, I think also based upon this idea of not gaining the emotional maturity to deal with the little things in life, the roadblocks and little bumps and things like that. I got jobs and I never had a problem when I went for a job interview in getting a job. And I excelled at that job when I first started working in it because I was a fast learner. The most important thing, my highest priority, was to impress everybody as to how wonderful I was, so that, I'd build up a little bit of money in the bank in terms of, people think you're doing a good job, so that when I started to relax a little bit, I thought, I'll have some leeway. People are not going to complain at me because, they know I do a good job. But, one of the things I've noticed is that if you do a good job and you show yourself to be the kind of person who gets things done, you don't get a break. They're like, oh, Chris is a person who gets a lot of work done. We'll give him some more work to do and more responsibility. And then I would kind of get overwhelmed because of what I really wanted to do was coast, after a while. So then I would start to lose my enthusiasm for the job. I'd start to worry, oh, somebody's going to find me out that I'm not doing my job properly. So before I got found out, I would always put in my notice and quit and move on to another job. And I never kept a job for more than 2 or 3 years. And I repeated that pattern quite a few times, over and over in my career, until I decided, well, I ought to be a consultant, because nobody expects a consultant to be in a job for a long time, So I became a contractor and then just hopped from place to place, doing my thing and leaving before anybody could find me out,
That seems very common for us, I think that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't think we talk about that a lot, but that leaving someplace, leaving a job, leaving a relationship before we're discovered, you know. God, that was a pattern in my life too, Chris. And I just thought, man, you just put that so eloquently that um, that I get it. So, so you're job hopping, and are you acting now?
Oh yes, I hadn't mentioned that, had I? Yeah, when I was in school, I did lighting for a school play, and I really enjoyed that feeling of just being in a team of people, like working together, and the lights and the actors and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't acting then because I was so focused on my academics at that time, and getting good grades and all the rest of it. I thought I can't take the time out to learn lines and all that kind of stuff. But I enjoyed doing that techie stuff, on the night of the play. So when I graduated and I got my first job, which was in Sheffield in England, um, I'd been working as a bartender. I'd done an internship up there and I was working as a bartender. But when I came back to get my job after graduation, I was like, I don't want to carry on doing that for whatever reason. I won't go into the details, but I thought I need another way of meeting people and, having some kind of social life. And I'd remembered that I really enjoyed that working in the theatre, and I thought I'll go back and do the same thing, do some lighting or some sound tech work and that kind of thing. And so I found a drama group to join. And the first play that I was involved with, I helped with the lighting. And then after that, they were like, oh, we're short of young men to go on stage, because my group that I joined used to be the Catholic Women's Guild Drama Society, and there were a lot more women in it than men. So they needed me to be on stage. And so after that, I had a speaking part in every play. And I even did one play where there were only 4 characters and I had the biggest part. I just love doing comedy. I love that, getting the reaction from the audience, like delivering the lines and waiting for the laughter. And, it was a real rush. And as soon as one play was finished, you get that anticlimax when it's all over. And I guess was kind of an addiction as well. And that's where I met my wife. She was doing the props. She didn't like to go on stage. She said, the only way I want to be on stage is if the lights are out and I'm all dressed in black. But yeah, her mother and herself were very into the theatre and they'd been doing it for years. And we met and hit it off at some point and started dating. So yeah, that was a good decision to start doing that theatre. I really enjoyed it, and it helped my self-confidence immensely to know that I could go up on stage. And I have a great memory. I was always good at learning my lines and never forgetting them, when I was on stage. And I loved the attention that I was getting from the audience, and all the congratulations after the show was great.
And it did, and like you said, it didn't last. It was like, then you were, you get the big congratulations and it's like, okay, what's next?
Yep.
Would that be right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always what's next. Yeah. It's always what's next. It's so funny that there's something I noticed in theatre groups. There was the people who were involved in it. I mean, they love to get that attention, and it's very easy to fall in love, in inverted commas, when you're working with somebody every day in a play, and especially if your roles in the play together are, that you having a romantic relationship in the play. So it was quite common for people to have affairs and, like for marriages to break up because somebody would have an affair with somebody else in the theatre group, and it would come to light. And there was all that kind of drama going on, you know, the personal drama as well as the drama on stage. But I mean, I don't know. As Bill W. says, you know, drinking was far more important to me than anything else. So I didn't get into that kind of trouble at that time. But, you know, I saw a lot of it going on. But I did kind of, you know, I did kind of have that feeling sometimes when I was on stage with somebody, you know, you'd have that feeling of a romantic connection with them because you were working together so closely on stage.
Was your drinking escalating at this time, Chris? I mean, was it kind of?
Ooh, you know, I think it must have been. There was a point in my life at which I was only really drinking beer, and there was a point at which I was like, you know what, I could take a couple of shots, you know, and get a little bit of extra buzz out of that. And I'll tell you this story. Right before I came to the United States, you know, Janet and myself were dating, and we had some good friends who we went dancing with. And our friend was doing a psychology degree at college, and she asked me to go back to her place to do, you know, a survey for one of her assignments that she was doing. And I took a bottle of tequila with me, and, you know, we made Mexican food and drank tequila and did our thing. And then, like, we ended up sleeping together because, you know, we drank that whole bottle of tequila between us. And, you know, the inhibitions were down, you know, as it is when you've drunk half a bottle of tequila. So, you know, I guess that was a little bit of a consequence, you know, of going even further down the scale and switching to the liquor and putting myself in that situation where, you know, you were alone with somebody and drunk, when, you know, I think a sensible person would know, don't get yourself into that situation, you know, where you're on your own with another person who's married, who's, you know, your girlfriend's best friend, basically. You know, and then add alcohol into the mix and you're going to get into a lot of trouble. So, you know, that happened. I'm a terrible liar, terrible at covering up my wrongdoings. I've never been able to keep a straight face and, you know, and lie about something. So, you know, everything came to light. And there was a lot of emotional upset and trouble and everything around it, you know. And it was about that time when my work contract that I'd been working on was coming to an end, and I was looking around for another work opportunity, and the chance came up to go and work in Dallas. And, you know, and I took that opportunity, you know, because it was easier to run and go and do something else than to stick around in the discomfort, you know. And I mean, I invited my girlfriend to come with me, but obviously with that big, you know, infidelity that had just happened, and it being such a big move to go to another country and all the rest of it, it was just like, you know, it just wasn't the right time to be asking somebody to, you know, to drag them across to another country, you know, away from all their friends and family, you know. So I went and I did that on my own, and my drinking really did take off then. The booze is so cheap here in the United States compared to the UK that, you know, it's easy not to get a bottle of tequila, but, you know, a handle of tequila, you know, and start working on that when you get home from work. And it wasn't too long after I came to the States that I was so hungover one morning that I couldn't make it into work, which, you know, never happened to me before, you know. I mean, I'd got myself mostly to the point at which my alcohol tolerance was so high, I mostly didn't get a hangover or didn't get sick when I was drinking. But, you know, drinking a liter of Montezuma tequila, I think will do a number on anybody, maybe. And I decided that was the first time well, the second time, not counting that time when I was doing my college course, when I decided to give up for a week, I decided to take a break from alcohol, and I didn't drink for several months after that. But when I started up again, which was I think I quit maybe in November or December, and then I started up again at Easter the following year. I went out to a bar with some work colleagues, and I thought, yeah, it's been long enough now. What they say, I've been not drinking for a few months. Now I'm qualified to drink like ordinary people again, which of course didn't happen, because that night I was buying everybody in the bar like rounds of exotic cocktails, slippery nipples, I think it was. Probably spent about $100 on booze that night, and so it did go back to kind of where it had started, and I just carried on from that point. I didn't stop again for a long time.
When did someone, your wife or anyone, try to intervene at any point with your drinking?
Well, at any time, absolutely. Probably much later than, much after it had become a problem, I would say. I'd had to switch jobs in the US, and I got a new contract, and we moved up to Plano in Texas, and I wasn't very keen on that job. It was quite stressful, and my drinking was getting pretty bad. And, I'd started drinking to blackout more regularly than I had been. And, I think at that time my wife was just, oh, well, it's just the stress, just the stress of work. She didn't see it as the progression of alcoholism, which, looking back now, I see it as that. And of course, I didn't even know I was an alcoholic until I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. So, I didn't see it that way either. So eventually I was like, that job's too stressful. We're going to go back to the UK, which we did. And then we turned around after a few months and we came back to Chicago. And in that job, I was traveling a huge amount and, drinking on expense account. So, I was out of town a lot. So, I got to do more of my drinking away at that time. But I would say my drinking progressed even more. Then one of my work colleagues was an alcoholic also, so we kind of drank together and encouraged each other, as we do. And it wasn't really even then, that my wife was like, this is too much, because I could be away often enough, and do my drinking, away from home more. I don't think it was really until I had another change of job. While I was up in Chicago, I got my green card, and I was offered a job here in Knoxville at the University of Tennessee College of Veterinary Medicine. And so we moved here, and I really enjoyed that job. We bought a house down here. I was working in the garden. Everything was great. And it was one of those things where I had that feeling of, I've arrived. And somehow that was like, my drinking moderated a little at that time, because it just seemed everything in life was good. There was no problems. I was enjoying my work, everything was great. I was enjoying working in the garden. Everything was wonderful. And it wasn't until that little cloud had worn off, and then it's like, you're in the job for a while, and you've been in the same house for a while, and it's like, oh, is all there is to life, that my drinking started to take off again. And that was when I really did start to get consequences, my wife had moved out to stay in a long stay hotel one night, and, she didn't come back till I'd sworn off the booze. And, I stayed off it for a short amount of time. Then we went on vacation down to Key West, and I started drinking again. And maybe a couple of years after that, she'd moved out for months, got a rental apartment, because the drinking had got so bad. And I managed to persuade her to come back. But then our finances, were not looking so good. I'd quit my job at the vet school. I'd been commuting to Nashville. My wife had been living in that apartment for a while. So we'd been spending more money than I was accustomed to. Spending more than I was making. We decided at that point that, we were going to have to downsize. And I'd been out in the garden, feeling sorry for myself, drinking, thinking about, the fact that we were going to have to give up this house, that we loved. That I thought this, what we're like. It's like all these little symbols of success that say, I must be all right because I've got this, and that, I'm married and I've got the house and all the rest of it, like one of those things, I was losing and having to give up because of my drinking. And I went up to bed that night, and my wife came up to tell me, I'd left the chair outside. It was going to get damaged by the dew, or it might rain or whatever. I was so mad about that, being criticized, that, I went into the garage and got the axe and the machete out of the garage and threatened her and told her, maybe she'd better leave. And so, at that point I was staring down the barrel, not only of losing the house, but also of, losing my marriage as well. And I'd already quit that other job that I was working in Nashville. So now I was like, no job, maybe, prospect of no marriage, and, no house maybe coming up too. So that was really the big thing for me, having got to that point. And it was so strange, Joe. I tell you, when I was drinking, I was always fantasizing about, well, if I wasn't married, I'd sell the house, and, I'd take the money, and I'd at least be able to drink like I wanted to for a couple of years, moving to a trailer and fill it up with cases of cheap gin or whatever, I wouldn't have to work for a while, and I'd be able to drink the way I wanted. And I kind of got to the point where I was thinking to myself, this part of me that has this fantasy when I'm drinking, it's actually working in my real life to try and make it come about, that I'm going to get divorced and we're going to sell the house, and I'm going to end up with this chunk of money, and, I'm going to drink it away. And it was a real wake-up call for me, and I decided at that point, maybe I ought to go and see a therapist, because it was not normal for me, like threatening my wife with an axe and a machete, that was the emotional bottom for me.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly is a turning point, wasn't it, Chris, for you?
It was. Yes.
So what you went to go see a therapist, and
yeah, so
did they encourage you to go?
Yeah, we'd been to see this guy before. Yeah, it's okay. Janet and myself had been to see this guy before. And he'd done like, Myers-Briggs and that kind of stuff for us. But when I went to see him this time, he was like, oh, you mentioned something about alcohol was mentioned last time you were here. Maybe that's the problem. And I was thinking about that. And I haven't really mentioned this, in the course of my story, because I think throughout most of my life, I wasn't even aware that it was something that was going on. And I didn't really become aware of it until this incident with with the axe and the machete. I said to him, no, I don't think it is the alcohol. I've got this rage in me, like I hate being criticized. And if somebody tells me they're disappointed with me, I want to kill them, And I mean, I'll talk about this a little bit more, when I get to talking about my inventory, but I thought it's not the alcohol, it's this other thing, this inability to cope with these emotional things, that are going on inside me that I don't really know where it comes from and why it's happening. And I just can't cope with it. And he knew, I guess he had either his own experience with recovery or, he'd seen enough people to know that these things, not being able to cope with our emotions and stuff like that is just as much a symptom of alcoholism or, addiction as the drinking itself, the emotional dysregulation, whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, he said, I mean, he kind of kept at it in a very gentle way. And he was like, well, if you go to your first meeting, this is what's going to happen. You'll come in, they'll probably do this first step meeting. You won't have to talk if you don't want to. And he demystified it for me to make it seem, as if it was a doable thing, that I could go to an AA meeting and it would be okay, And it was like, well, obviously it's your choice about whether you do it or not. But I don't think you've got very long based upon how you've described your drinking and how much you're drinking. I think probably you ought to make a decision fairly soon because otherwise you're going to be in some real trouble. And I did decide to do that, I took his advice, he told me about Park 40 Club, and I went there for my first meeting. It was a Thursday lunchtime at noon. I walked into my first meeting, and your first guest on the podcast, Debbie N, she was chairing the meeting, and they did do the first step meeting, and the things people shared that matched my own experience made me realize that I was in the right place. And I really loved the open and honest sharing that people did about their problems. And, by the time the meeting was finished, I felt that I'd come home, and I felt that I was in a place that I'd been looking for all my life. That all my life had been felt that I didn't quite fit in. I couldn't talk about my problems. Nobody would understand. And by the time I'd come out of that meeting, I was like, oh, there are people who feel the same way as I do. There is somebody who understands. And I knew I was going to come back for my next meeting. It was so funny. After I went back to see my therapist afterwards, I took him my white chip to show him, to say, I'd been to my meeting, and I carried on going to, I went to a meeting every day after that. They say do 90 meetings in 90 days, which I did. I was only seeing my therapist once a week. So, by the time I saw him again, like a week later, I'd already been to 7 meetings. And, after the second time, I'd already got a sponsor and started working the steps. And I was like, I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. And I was telling him, one of the things they say is like lack of power. That's our dilemma. I've always been trying to control people to get what I want. And now I realize, that it's not right to do that. It's like the ring in the Rings of Power. It's the ring gives Sauron the ability to control people, and that's what makes him evil. And here's me trying to control everything around me to get what I want. And, that makes me in the wrong, So, and we had some really nice, interesting philosophical conversations, because I think after that, it was the AA was doing the work. I didn't really need the therapy after that, other than for him to keep an eye on me and make sure I was doing okay, through those first few weeks. But it was a life-changing thing for me to find Alcoholics Anonymous and realize, how I can't believe that after drinking like that at 17, that it took me till 53 to find out that I was an alcoholic, because I guess I didn't know what an alcoholic was. You know, a lot of people say this. They think, oh, the alcoholic's the homeless person under the bridge. That is one of the consequences, that you might suffer, as a consequence of alcoholism. But of course, there's many more other consequences, that build up before you get to that point, and I was not too far from that point where, when I came into AA, looking at the potential of divorce and, not having a place to live and, not having a job. I was very close to that. But one of the things I loved about AA when I started getting into the steps was that it was a spiritual program. I was brought up in a household that never went to church. So I had exposure to religion because they do religion in schools in the UK. That's another one of the things that's a little bit different. We don't have anything in our constitution that says there's separation between church and state. Of course, the Church of England is the official church of the state. So, so we did, religious education in school. We had religious assemblies. But the stories that people had told me about the significance of the religious events, that we all know about, and talk about, when you go to church or, what's in our common culture, it never really seemed right to me. In my heart, it didn't resonate with me as being true. And I had, I guess I'd kind of given up on religion. I think when I was young, I had the idea that there was a higher power that was involved in my life and, an organizing principle in the world. But because I had not found this connection with the religion that was predominant in my culture, I thought, well, I must be wrong. I mean, I can't be the one that's right because so many other people say this is what's true, and so I thought, well, I must just not know, I couldn't just accept what other people were telling me. So, I couldn't have faith on that basis. I still felt in my heart that, I couldn't make that connection. So all through my life, I'd identified myself as an agnostic, just as it says in our literature that, it's just that I don't know anything about God, and maybe that there is no way for me to know that I can't know, and I'd gone through my life mostly like that. And I'd investigated other religions, especially Buddhism, but, I'm an alcoholic. I don't have a huge amount of discipline for, learning to sit in a cross-legged or, sitting in silence for any amount of time and that kind of stuff. So I kind of dabbled in it from an intellectual point of view, but I didn't really practice it, as a daily practice. So when I found that there's a spiritual path that's made just for people like us, I was like, oh, this is so wonderful. This is what I've always been looking for. And, so I really did grasp the spiritual toolkit, that was offered to me with both hands. And it's been a life changer for me.
I always thought like that chapter, We Agnostics, I really think it's one of the most spiritual pieces of literature I've ever read, and it was very helpful to me. And so when you mention that, it just makes me think, and how is your relationship with a higher power now, Chris?
Oh, I pray regularly. And it's a big part of my life. Whenever I'm in trouble or I'm emotionally disturbed, it's my go-to, to get on my knees and pray and ask my higher power for guidance. And especially when I was first getting sober, when I was getting back into work, and I'd gone through this. I'd always gone through this thing, they call it imposter syndrome nowadays, when I was doing all the same things again, sober at work, that I was doing before, I stopped drinking. But now I was able to go through it sober and try and apply the tools that I had to it. So in that first job where I was going through, oh boy, I was having to stop work and pray, get on my knees and pray pretty regularly, because I was frightened, I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to quit. I didn't have alcohol to, put in me to numb the emotions and allow me to sit around complaining about everybody else and pretending that it wasn't me, So, prayer was so important to me then. When I was working on my second and third steps, I'd realized that the fact that I couldn't accept the things that people were telling me about their interpretation of these, religious matters. The fact that I couldn't accept it must have meant that I already had my own conception of God at that point. Because how would I have known to say to myself, that doesn't seem right to me, unless I already had my own conception? So when I was very young, I already had my own conception of God. And I decided that is what I'm going to go back to. I always had that. It was obscured by me thinking I was wrong about it because of what other people had told me. So I was like, I'm going to go back to my old conception of God, which was always a loving God, that was in my own heart, from the beginning. So it became natural then for me to turn to that inside myself, to turn to that higher power and ask for help whenever I needed it, and I found at the very least I got relief from my emotional turmoil. Quite often when I started praying about something because I was afraid or angry, and immediately the resistance would drop. I would start crying, because I was like, the pain of the suffering of my own fear and my own anger, had, when the resistance to feeling that was broken down and I realized, oh, I'm just afraid, then I would stop being angry and the dam would burst and I would cry a little, and then I would get some kind of inspiration about how to move forward, just whatever it was about doing the next right thing. Or I'd remember something that somebody had told me in the program, that you don't have to do everything at once. You just have to identify what is the next right thing to do. Just do that and things will probably work out okay, maybe I'd made a mistake at work, and I was afraid to own up to it. And I'd be just like, oh, I just have to do the next right thing, which is just book a meeting to meet with people. I don't have to do everything now, but when everyone's on the meeting, the words will come to me as to what I have to say to explain, oh, I did this. This is what's happening. I made a mistake. Now there are some consequences to deal with, and somehow it always worked out okay. Nobody yelled at me and I didn't lose my job, and all the things that I'd feared were going to happen if I made a mistake, and I owned up to it. None of it ever happened, and gradually over time I learned, well, maybe the things that I was afraid of were just in my mind, they were just my imagination,
So how do you handle, stressful situations now, setbacks? I know you've had some really challenging times lately, or at least in the last few months. How do you handle that, Chris, and keep moving forward?
Well, I'll tell you a couple of things that are related. There's a lady in in my home group who, I'll tell you, my sponsor, who I had when I first came to the program, passed away a few years ago. He had cancer and he died sober. And so I went for a while without having a sponsor. And but I still took my inventory, whenever I was disturbed, at the very least, I'd be like, oh, I'm disturbed. I've got to write this down and find out what my part in it is, and I was saying, but then I have to talk, of course, you have to talk to somebody else about it, and usually they recommend another alcoholic, but both my wife and myself both work from home. So I would talk to my wife about it. And one of my friends in my home group says, oh, Chris's sponsor is his wife, who's an Al-anon. She laughed about that. I was like, yeah, that's probably true, but we were working together. We'd been reunited at some point because of the step work that I'd done. And my wife had said to me, well, I had to see real change in order for us to get back together. And there was real change, So we'd moved back in together, and we were both working from home. So whenever I was disturbed about something, whatever it was, work or a neighbor that said something, or something on the TV or whatever it was, internet, I'd take my inventory, I'd talk to my wife about it, and, I'd work through the steps in that way. And then later, people had asked me to sponsor them, I've been sober for a good few years. I started picking up some sponsees. And I had a sponsee who was relapsing, and it was difficult. It was a difficult situation for me emotionally, because as somebody who I cared about, and you can't really do anything about somebody else's drinking other than try and pass on your own experience. And it was heartbreaking to see somebody building stuff up and then tearing it back down again, every few weeks or every few months, and so I thought, if I'm going to do this, I really need to get my own sponsor again, so I racked my brain for a while, trying to think of who would make a good sponsor for me, because I'm a very sensitive person. I don't need a hard ass telling me, what to do, or yelling at me, or being strict with me, because I'm too sensitive for that. So I was trying to find somebody who I knew would be gentle with me, So eventually I decided upon somebody, and I asked them to be my sponsor, and I started working with them, and we worked through the steps. And in the meantime, my sponsee had kind of gone back out again, and I'd done some step work around it. I was saying to my sponsor, I'm afraid of what I might be asked to do, in the future. What it says in the book is, we might have to take an alcoholic into our home. They might burn a mattress in the bedroom, or we might have to administer sedatives under the direction of a doctor, or I was worried about all that, what responsibility I may have to take on. And, I was doing some step work along those lines and working through that. And in the meantime, my wife retired. She got to the age of 67. I decided I was financially in a position where I could retire. I'd had this relationship with work all these years where it was stressful to me, and I'd built up enough money in the bank, and my wife had some retirement income to help us out with that. So we were both in the process of retiring. And then we decided to take a trip to visit some friends of ours who had moved to Myrtle Beach. And during that trip, there was an accident, and my wife was killed. I woke up in the hospital, and there was a police officer there who broke the news to me that she hadn't made it. So anyway, he
sorry.
had. Oh, thank you, Joe. Yeah. So he asked me, "Is there anybody I can call for you?" And I thought to myself, "Yeah, there's a lot of people." That's the great blessing of being in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, that there's a lot of support available. So, of course, the first thing I did was ask him to call my sponsor. for me, and to call, one of my wife's closest friends, who would take care of the job of passing on news, to her friends. And the friends that we'd been going to visit drove up and picked me up from the hospital and drove me back to Knoxville. And the next day, it was Saturday, and I went to my home group, which is a Saturday morning big book study, 9:30 on a Saturday, because I thought I need a meeting. I need to tell people where I'm at and what's happened. So I guess a couple of things, that come out of that. One is having faith that there is a bigger reality, a greater reality that we're all embedded in, and that these lives that we have are just a small part of that reality. There's something beyond that. Whatever it may be, we may not understand everything about it, or what it looks like, or what happens to us, when we pass on from that physical form into whatever comes next, but that there is something, so that's one thing. Having that faith makes a loss easier to bear for me. The other thing is knowing that I did not want to drink. That was the first thing that occurred to me. Not wanting to lose my marriage was one of the big things that brought me into sobriety in the first place. But during the 8 years I've been sober, I had lost the desire to drink, and when this tragedy happened, I knew right away that I wasn't going to drink, that, I'd survived for a reason, that God still had something for me to do in the world, which is why, even though we were both in the same car, that Janet had passed on because it was her time, and I still had work to do. So and then, of course, the community of people supporting me, asking me if there's anything they could do to help, praying for me. I have felt uplifted by people's prayers, that I've been carried along by that positive energy of all the prayers that have been offered up on my behalf. I really feel that that has buoyed me up and helped me through a difficult time, and I know it still goes on, that there's still people who are praying for me. And somebody who I don't even know who this gentleman was, he puts his name on the envelope, but in AA we don't always know people's last names. So somebody, Rick, had sent me a little booklet saying, "I will trust God," and it had daily prayers and meditations, for working through grief and loss. And I worked through that, and I'm still working through some of that right now. So it's been a help. So I guess to sum up, I would say having that faith is an incredible thing. I never had faith before that there was something more, and that it's a faith that no matter what happens, that everything's okay. Everything's happening the way it should be happening. That is a tremendous thing. Having the wonderful community of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the things that I've done, working every day on my program and working with the sponsor, having taken away the obsession to drink, and it not coming back. I never really had a thought of drinking, and I still haven't, since my wife passed, because my sobriety is, they say that first things first, sobriety has to come first before everything else. And it still comes first. It's the most important fact in my life, and even when Janet was still here with me, I was very blessed. She never said, do you have to go to another one of those damn meetings? She always encouraged me to be involved in sobriety and work with my sponsees, and and she had her own program, in Al-anon, to do that. Our programs, our spiritual growth was important to both of us, and it was something we shared together. And now that she's passed on, it's something I still have.
Chris, it's amazing. Thank you for your willingness to share that. I really think that somebody out there could use that, because I think that is hope, even in a tremendous loss that you had, and to what a wonderful person that Janice was. You're bringing hope. So thank you for that. Thank you. Is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to share, Chris?
Well, I will tell you this, that, the sponsee that I had that was causing me trouble, that caused me to get my own sponsor, has been sober for 4 months now. And that all the things that I was frightened about happening, when I was going through that before, have happened. That because of the program, and because God works in that way that God works in to try and turn all things to good, that the things that I was afraid of have happened, but it's all been okay. It's great to be, see somebody getting sober and putting their life back together, and that in whatever small way, that I can have a part in helping to have that happen.
Our book says we will not want to miss this, right?
Yes.
Well, before I let you go, I have my rapid fire questions. So if you're ready and willing, no pressure, Chris. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
Is this a recovery slogan? I think I would have to say it's just do the next right thing. Because I have to use that so often, because I'm kind of fearful. And sometimes you get in a situation where whichever way you turn, it seems like each option you've got of the things that you should do not a good option. There's going to be some kind of emotional toll that's on you, regardless of what you do. But having the direction to say, do the next right thing, it has been a big help to me. And it's got me unstuck so many times since I've got sober, and it's transformed my life.
It's good. What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
I'm not sure if I have one. When you're doing the fourth step, there's the people, places, the principles. One of the things is the principles that you have a resentment against. And one of the things I've identified at an early stage, I don't think this is a recovery slogan, but it's something that people say all the time that I had a resentment about, which was there's no such thing as a free lunch. And that always annoyed me, when I was working, because I'm the kind of person who always appreciated a free lunch, and I am of the opinion now that, in fact, the entire universe is one gigantic free lunch. So I'll put that as a stand-in for my least favorite slogan. I think we ought to be telling people, absolutely, that the miracle of creation is a gigantic free lunch.
I like that. What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
Sobriety superpower. I mean, it may well just be my wonderful English accent, because
pretty good one.
Everybody remembers who I am. And sometimes, I'll get people who want me to sponsor them just because I have a cool English accent, But, I'm quite impatient, and I don't think I'm really that good at taking people through the steps. But the fact that I get up and read the keys to the kingdom, is that inspires people, and it gives that message about the fellowship and what it can do for you. I really enjoy being able to have that influence and having that effect on people's lives, because I don't think I have as much effect as some people do in taking people through the steps, because I'm not very patient in terms of reading page by page through the book with people, and like doing it the long, hard, slow, laborious way. So it's quite handy that God has given me, some way of being inspirational that makes up for my lack of patience,
If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Oh, I think I would say, Chris, you're an alcoholic. Maybe you ought to get help sooner rather than later. Because, when I was first getting sober, I was sort of, before I got to the point where I wasn't regretting the past, I don't really regret the past now. So I think I kind of accept now that I needed everything that happened to me to order to get me to the point where I could get sober. And of course, all of our experiences can then be put to good use in helping other people. So, I mean, I don't really have any regrets for that. I mean, imagine if I'd have got sober in my 20s instead of at 53. I mean, the different life I would have had, and the suffering, my own, and those of people around me, that could have been avoided, if I'd have known that much sooner. So, I mean, I think it's a really important thing to do, to be open about alcoholism, what it is, and if people have got alcoholism in their family, to talk to their children about it, let them know what it is, so that they can maybe identify themselves as alcoholic a little bit sooner and get in the program, before you lose everything.
Yeah, well said, Chris. What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
Well, I'm a big Pitbull fan. When I'm cooking in the kitchen, I like to put on Pandora Pitbull radio. I like anything with Jamaican patois rapping in it, like Calabria. I like Pitbull's Fireball, which, is all about taking shots. But you know what? that doesn't worry me. It's all about getting people to take shots in the bar. But I don't have a desire to drink nowadays, so I can listen to a song about taking shots of cinnamon whiskey, and it doesn't bother me. I can still enjoy it.
I hear you. So if you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
Oh boy. I don't think I have anything, Joe. I mean, okay. I love my sponsor. We meet every week. He's been so helpful in me, since my wife passed, in checking up on me and making sure I'm okay. I've got my sponsees that, I work with, that are so supportive, and my AA community. I've got service work to do. I'm the treasurer of my home group. Given that I'm not going to ask for the impossible, to turn back time or like bring anybody back to life, which, I know is not possible. I think I've got everything I could possibly have at the moment to help me through with my current circumstances. I'm very grateful for what I have today. There's still the sadness of loss. I still miss my wife every day.
Yeah.
But there's no regret that there was anything left unsaid when she passed. We'd said everything that needed saying. So I'm grateful for that too.
It's pretty amazing. What step do you love the most?
Ooh, has to be step 7. I mean, what could be better than that? Be like, I've got these character defects. I can't deal with my life. My mind is all messed up. I can't fix myself. God, you just fix it for me, please. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And I mean, it really does work. And, talking about like wanting a free lunch. I mean, there's no bigger free lunch than be like, God, please remove these shortcomings from me, and having it really happen. I mean, it's a miracle. I love that.
What step do you love the least?
Oh, of course, it's got to be step 9. I really despise having to make amends to people, and I had to make 1 or 2 amends in sobriety, 10th step amends for, things that I've done. And it always leaves a nasty taste in my mouth because I'm prideful, It's not easy humbling myself and admitting that I've made a mistake, I have great difficulty with that, but I know it has to be done. It's easier if it's done promptly. The longer I wait, the harder it gets. So do it quickly. I'd like to get it out of the way.
What is one of your favorite movies?
My favorite movies. I have so many. I love The Matrix. And it's not, I mean, obviously the action scenes in it are absolutely incredible, and it's got some of the most incredible special effects, that's bled into all movies that have come after, have been influenced by it. But it's so deep in terms of its use of philosophy and spirituality, the idea that not that we're living in a computer simulation, but that this reality that we see is not the full story, that there's something beyond that maybe we're not seeing or we don't necessarily know about, really resonates with me, So even movies 2 and 3, which a lot of people, I don't understand what that's all about. I even enjoy those, the 3 of the original trilogy. So I quite like those. And I'll tell you one.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll tell you one other one that I really like.
Yeah.
There's a Disney movie called Enchanted that starts off in the cartoon world, and then the cartoon character comes into the real world in New York, and brings like all the fairy tale stuff into New York. I love that because I always have this fantasy, and it goes back to my theatre days, that one day we'll all burst out into song, and everybody will know the words, and we'll all be able to sing and dance together, and that life will be like that movie. I would really enjoy that.
That's a great movie too. What I was going to tell you is that when you mentioned The Matrix, my daughter, one of the names that was seriously considered was Trinity. So I am a Matrix fan myself, so I know. And finally, Chris, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Mike Kay, who passed on a few years ago, and I just love what was written on his headstone, which, it said, "Well done, faithful servant." I can't imagine that my life could reflect those values the same way as Mike Kay's did, because really he really lived this program, and I was true to it. I kind of feel sometimes, fear gets in the way for me sometimes. I don't always do the things that I'm supposed to do, but I would like to think that it was recognized that I did the best that I could, to be faithful.
Well, I know that you did an amazing job sharing your story, and I appreciate everything. And I would be remiss, because for some of the listeners out there, Chris is well known in our area for he mentioned the keys to the kingdom, and his rendition of it is very powerful, and it is inspirational. And I asked him before if he would be willing to share that. So, were you still willing, Chris?
I am still willing, yes.
I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, well, I'll say for those who may not know that the Keys of the Kingdom comes from the stories of the AA pioneers in the back of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's actually, the reading is from the last few paragraphs of the story, which is by one of the first two women in Alcoholics Anonymous, who were in the first 100. And she was a great writer. She wrote a great story, and this little reading is very well written too. So this is how it goes. The last 15 years of my life have been rich and meaningful. I've had my share of problems, heartaches, and disappointments, because that's life. But also I've known a great deal of joy and a peace that is the handmaiden of an inner freedom. I have a wealth of friends, and with my AA friends, an unusual quality of fellowship. For to these people I am truly related. First through mutual pain and despair, and later through mutual objectives and a newfound faith and hope. And as the years go by, working together, sharing our experiences with one another, and also sharing a mutual trust, understanding, and love, without strings, without obligation, we acquire relationships that are unique and priceless. There is no more aloneness, with that awful ache so deep in the heart of every alcoholic that nothing before could ever reach it. That ache is gone and need never return again. Now there is a sense of belonging. I've been wanted and needed and loved. In return for a bottle and a hangover, we have been given the keys of the kingdom.
Amen to that. Chris, thank you so much. Amazing.
And thank you for inviting me, Joe. It's been an honor.
A new episode is released every Thursday at noon. You can listen to the show in your favorite podcast apps: Amazon Audio, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the. Please follow, like, subscribe, and share, because someone out there needs to hear this today.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's Experience, Strength, and Hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to The Cup of Joe Show.